love your work? Do you want to love your work? Do you even believe it's possible to love your work? Our guest and I agree that it is 100% possible for you and those around you. Today, we're talking about intrinsic motivation, what it is, why it matters, and how you can create more of it to help you achieve the work and life you really want. Get ready for an exciting and I believe potentially life-changing conversation. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, their organizations, and the world. And so if you're listening to this podcast, you could have been here with us live. Well, you can't go back, but you could be with us for future live episodes by just joining our podcast channels, either on Facebook or LinkedIn. You can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn as a way for you to find out what's coming live so you can take advantage of those then, if you so choose. And if you happen to be listening to this, you can always go back and find this to watch this conversation if you would prefer. And today's episode is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success, which you can learn more about by going to longdistanceteambook.com. And with all of that out of the way, I'm going to bring in my guest, if I can get the button. There we go. And so there's Stefan Falk, and let me introduce him to you, and then we're going to dive in. So let me tell you about Stefan. He is an internationally recognized human performance expert for top business executives, special ops in the armed forces, and elite athletes. He has spent more than 30 years helping thousands of individuals, teams, and organizations become intrinsically motivated, doing what they love to do because they love the experience of doing it, not because of extrinsic rewards that come with it, such as money or status. His work at McKinsey & Company specialized in leadership and corporate transformation. He has studied how employee satisfaction surveys and other relevant work performance data covering more than 1.5 million professionals. And he's performed 360 feedback interviews and surveys for more than 1,000 leaders and executives. He's held C-level roles at several global companies, and his leadership and human performance techniques have been developed with leading scientists in the fields of neuroscience, behavioral science, and psychology. He is here today because he's the author of this fabulous new book titled Intrinsic Motivation: Learn to Love Your Work and Succeed as Never Before. Who doesn't want that? Stefan, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
So I want to open with a question that I often ask people, because you didn't wake up when you were, although you talk in the book about the things that you learned as a kid. You didn't wake up when you were 9 and say, I'm going to study and become an expert in human performance and intrinsic motivation. So I guess the question would be sort of, what led you to this work?
Well, I actually think it has to do with my childhood and some of my experiences in my childhood. I think one thing, and I don't think I mentioned this in the book, is when I started school at first grade, I saw bullying for the first time. And it just blew my mind. I could not understand what was going on. Other kids, being bad to other kids for no apparent reason. And that sort of memory stayed with me, and that's sort of also shaped me a little bit of who I have become. So that's one of the experiences. It really shaped me. I think that was the first spark that, how can people do this, or human being do this? Of course, I didn't formulate it that way when I was a kid, 7 years old. But then when I also played a lot alone when I was a kid, because I was overweight and I was not very popular among other kids. So I spent a lot of time in my room playing myself. I'd play, stimulating myself.
Yep.
Which I think led to an extreme ability to actually fantasize and imagining things. That played really well for me when my mother rented a piano, for reasons I still don't understand. But I became obsessed with that piano. I just had this dream and fantasy of, I wanted it to sound like a virtuoso. So I was hammering away on that piano for probably 2 years, and it sounded like crap. but 2 hours every day. And my mother, poor her, she was like, why did I buy this piano for him? And then all of a sudden one day, I think I turned 10, I sat down and something was different. It sounded really good. And what was carrying me through that process was my fantasy, my imagination, how I wanted it to sound. That made me withstand the pain of realizing that I'm very far from it. I think these experiences basically set me off on a path that I think is very true to our purpose as human beings, which is to constantly learn and develop and try to do good by others. And that's actually the drivers behind intrinsic motivation.
So that phrase, intrinsic motivation, is one that everyone has heard,
Mm,
but I don't think everyone really understands.
mm,
And so I want us to talk about that for a minute. So, since it's the title of the book, it
mm,
seems appropriate that I
mm,
ask you,
mm,
what is intrinsic motivation really?
mm.
What is it?
Well, intrinsic motivation is, first of all, when we are in a situation of intrinsic motivation, we perform the best. And the fundamental purpose why we engage in the activity is the experience we get. It is not the only purpose. Okay, we might be focused on the outcome and all these things, but it's fundamentally the the experience of the activity that really makes us want to engage in it over and over and over again. My mentor for many years, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he called this state flow. And that's the highest state of intrinsic motivation. But they also have other states like just immersed in deep concentration in doing something. Now, I think the question is, why are we equipped with the ability to be intrinsically motivated? Is it just for fun we have this ability? No, I truly believe it is because of purposeful design. Because just as rabbits have big ears for thermoregulation, or massive ears, we have this ability for a purpose. Because one of the key survival strategies for human beings, and that has taken us where we are, is to constantly learn and develop and do good by others. That's how we have survived. That's one of the key survival strategies. So that's why the brain is rewarding us with this fantastic experience when we're in intrinsic motivation. And when does it happen? It happens when we are involved in solving a challenging problem that interests us and or is important for another person that we solve. That's when it happens.
So, people will use, I have used words like, people want meaningful work. They want to do work that makes a difference. They want to do work where they feel like they're contributing. And
Mhm,
that's a that's a weak connective tissue to what you've just
mhm,
said,
mhm,
but it is connected. And
mhm,
yet, so many of the leaders that I work with, and I'm confident that at least at the start, so many of the leaders that you work with
mhm,
put so much focus on extrinsic
mhm,
motivation,
mhm,
extrinsic rewards,
mhm,
even though all of us have had that deep feeling of satisfaction and reward that comes with what you're saying. Why is it that there is so much focus in the world and with individual leaders
mhm,
around the extrinsic issues?
mhm. Well, and here comes the trick. At one hand, I say that cultivating your ability for intrinsic motivation is probably the most important life skill that you need to cultivate. Because if you're really after the intrinsic, rewards, they will come to you. Because with intrinsic motivation, you will build mastery much faster than other people will do it, and mastery will never go out of fashion. It doesn't matter, okay? But what makes it hard is so if learning and developing and doing good by others is a key survival strategy, there is another one we have that unfortunately in the time we live in is much stronger, and that is to conserve energy. Our brain rewards us more for conserving energy, for basically doing nothing or being very hesitant for when we should spend our energy. That's why we have habits, because when we operate on habits, we don't think. And
And that's
think,
why a lot of people spend a lot of time on these
yeah,
things,
yeah,
doing
yeah,
something other than this,
yeah,
making a phone call, right?
yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, yeah, and we should also understand that thinking is required for intrinsic motivation. And thinking, unfortunately, draws more energy than physical exercise. So that's sort of something that we need to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah, and again, to your point, well, it's a lot easier. I think another reason is that oftentimes leaders say, "Well, I don't have that." We may get to this point later. I don't have that in my control. I can't control how much. I'm not the CEO. I can't control what the budget is for what we can pay people. So I can't motivate people because I can't give them any more money, right? And you and I would both say, well, not so much, not so fast, my friend. We should think about this differently. And that's one of the reasons why I think this is such a very important conversation from us from a leadership perspective. As I'm reading the book, I'm thinking a lot, and really everything you've said so far gets in part to the way we see the world or our mindset. So how would you answer this question? Like, what mindset, because we're going to talk about, and the book talks a lot about specific things that we can do to cultivate this, right? To make this great thing called intrinsic motivation happen. But what mindset do we need first before we get into the actions of doing it?
Well, I think that there are many layers to the mindset you need to have. One is to recommit to this key survival strategy we have as a human beings. I mean, that's how biological systems survive in itself. It's by learning and adapting. Okay, that's sort of almost like a responsibility we have as being part of our species. So that's a fundamental thing, just to think about that, and also think about the benefits that will come to you by pursuing that. Another layer of the mindset is to just acknowledge the fact that we all know that we are born incomplete and will actually pass incomplete. And the purpose of life is try to be a little bit less incomplete when we pass. That's good for us. That's good for the people around us. That's good for humankind. Okay, that's it. In the professional world, one mindset that I often tell clients to try to get into is the mindset of being an elite athlete, being part of a team. Okay, because the only thing you can control in being part of a team is your own ability to play in the team and add value to that team. And in order to do that, because everyone in the team, you can play with that in your head, is also driving to be really contributing team members, you need to push yourself every day to tweak how you do things and learn new things, just like an elite athlete. Now, should it be that your team is not set out to win the Stanley Cup or whatever it is, or be the number one in its industry, you have invested in yourself and developed yourself. So chances are that you will be drafted to another organization. So that's sort of a no regret move to make sure that you develop yourself and you cultivate your intrinsic motivation every day. In the long-term perspective, and this is what people, all this knowledge I'm talking about now is readily available for people. It's just that read it, understand it, act upon it. Learning something new or developing how you do things, something every day, I would say between an hour to 2 hours, is super important for brain health. Okay, for long-term, short-term performance and health. And people that do that, their brain doesn't age at the same rate as people that don't do it. It also means that they withstand any type of brain damage much better. So, for instance, getting Alzheimer's or whatever, they withstand it. So there's a lot at stake here. It's not just one thing, being successful in all these things, which you will be. I can guarantee you, if you master intrinsic motivation, Kevin, you will learn stuff much faster than other people. You will be able to work effectively toward any type of goal and dream you have, because any type of goal and dream you have will entail stuff that doesn't naturally interest you, that you think is boring, too difficult, or uncomfortable. If you can unlock your intrinsic motivation for those things, you will pursue them. That's what's holding people back from their goals and dreams, because they don't do everything they need to do it. And then thirdly, you will also enjoy a greater work satisfaction in whatever you need to do and also want to do.
need, and want. We're going to get
mm,
to that a little bit
mm,
more. One of the
mm,
things that you suggest, I read a lot, in part because I read a lot, and in part
mm,
because I do
mm,
this show.
mm,
And you suggest something that I've never seen stated in the way that you stated it. You say that we shouldn't be focusing on activity, but that we should be focusing on exciting outcomes.
mm,
Uh, so first of all, sounds good. What does that mean, and
mm,
why should we
mm,
be focusing on exciting outcomes?
mm. Because if we focus only on pursuing or executing an activity without thinking about what we really want to achieve with that activity, we open up for, I would say, one of the main reasons people end up in a bad situation at work. They operate on habit. So you come into your work, you learn how to perform your tasks. When you think you have learned how to do them, you log out and you start to perform on habit. That's activity-based behavior. What happens when you perform your task more or less in the same way without constantly tweaking and improving and creating variation in how you do it is that your effort over time goes down. So actually your performance goes down. With that comes a lot of rework, incomplete task results, and all these things. But also with it comes boredom, because now these things are not challenging you anymore. So you start to procrastinate. You create backlogs, you miss deadlines, and all of a sudden you're in this situation. I have too much to do. Okay. And if that is sustained, of course, all the negative thoughts come. I mean, the thing with the mind, and we probably could talk about this for 2 weeks, without any breaks. Anything negative in your life, it could be if you have 10 tasks that you perform, but 2 of them you think are boring. The mind has a tendency to hijack us and just look at the negative things in our life. So we can get the impression my work is not fun, but it's 2 things that I don't think is fun.
Right.
That's how the mind works. And when I was thinking about this, uh, I think it was during Christmas. We went to Florida over Christmas, and thinking about what am I really talking about here? And something came to mind, and that was like animals in captivity. Uh, so what happens with the activity-based behaviors, performing on habit and all this and all the negative things that comes with that? It's actually you will suffer from something similar to animals in captivity. They call it zoochosis. I call it workchosis. You know, that's it. So that is what at stake here. Exciting outcomes is to push yourself to think, okay, now I'm going to perform this task. What would really be a fantastic outcome if I perform this task? Something that really would excite me. And you don't have to look far. You can look at the people dependent on the work result. How can I blow their mind? If I do this really good, and they say, "Oh, what happened here? This just enables me to do something I couldn't do before." Because everything in an organization, everything I do, the purpose of that is to enable someone else to do something else. In the simplest form, enable them not to have to do my work, but you enable them to do something. That's how it works. So, because what happens when you have an exciting outcome is that you're much more likely to plan for it. Think about the activity before you do it, which means that you have some kind of plan for pursuing it. And
And you're
it's
and you're not going to be on
no,
autopilot
no,
either,
no,
right?
no,
Like I want this to be awesome today. I want this to be
mm,
exciting today. I
mm,
can't be on autopilot.
no, no, no. And what happened? This is the thing, because you might say that, oh, he's talking against himself. He says that intrinsic motivation is the experience over the activity, and now he talks about outcomes. Well, exciting outcomes is important because it pushes you to come up with a plan, but it's following the plan when you actually are pursuing the task that creates the experience. Okay. And then you create also this foundation, what Csikszentmihalyi, my mentor, said about that when you're in flow, you also get immediate feedback on how you are doing. And if you don't have a plan for executing something, how on earth are you going to get feedback on it?
Right.
So that's the beauty of exciting outcomes. And pushing outcomes, really, aggressive outcomes, it leads to innovation. You can just do things the same way you have done them before and all these things. One of the aphrodisiacs for exciting outcomes and intrinsic motivation is to work with the time element. I use that every day. So let's say you and I were engaged in coaching. and we have an hour and a half every week. And then we have done this for 2 months, and everything is going really well, and we have an agenda, and you're having good progress and so forth. I often, every day, I think, okay, let's say I only had 15 minutes with Kevin, and I really want to create something that is so powerful and helpful for him. How would I spend those 15 minutes? It becomes really exciting because it becomes this challenging, interesting problem for me to think about. And even if we spend an hour and a half, that an hour and a half will be better still.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm.
The book, um, part of the framework of the book is this idea of focusing on exciting outcomes, but you
Mm.
really talk about three big ideas. You talk about learning to love any activity, which is sort of what I
Mm.
talked about in
Mm.
the open,
Mm.
as well as shaping your destiny. And then you talk a little bit about other people. So you
Mm.
just sort of unpack each of those three a
Mm.
little bit more as sort of pieces of this
Mm.
puzzle, if you would.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I mean, the first two sections in the book is basically to dealing with the biggest obstacle for any type of well-being, which is yourself. Okay, so the first sort of section is about basically driving your development. I would say sort of is the theme of that. The second section is being able to understand how your mind works, and also position yourself to be able to think logically and actually solve any type of problem, because few things excites us as much as just solving problems, and few things demotivates us so much when we don't understand what the problem is or we can't solve it. So that's very important for intrinsic motivation. And then when you get your head around how to manage yourself, then I think you're well positioned to deal with the second obstacle for well-being, which are other people just like yourself. So that's it. So that's the flow of it.
So, one of the things that I love about the book is that in each of those three sections, you give us a bunch of activities, things
Mm.
that we can do,
Mhm.
that we can start to apply to get
Mm.
better in these areas.
Mm.
And the thing I love the most about them is at the start of each one of them, you say, well, this is pretty easy to implement.
Mhm.
This is sort of moderately easy to implement. This is going to be harder to do. Like,
Mm.
I love that you just tell us up front that. So, and I have to tell you, I think you'll find this interesting. Like, I'm looking at the ones that say, well, these are going to be hard. I'm like, I can do that. Like, I'm
Mm.
immediately moving to that. But,
Mm.
really, there's a bunch of really, really practical
Mhm.
ideas that you share with
Mhm.
us,
Mhm.
and certainly people are you're going to want a copy of this book, Intrinsic Motivation:
Mhm.
Learn to Love Your Work and Succeed as Never Before. And so we can't unpack it all in the
Mhm.
few minutes that we have left.
Mhm.
But are there one or two of those practices or exercises that you might want to feel led to share with us right now?
Yeah, I mean, the key theme that everyone needs to subscribe to is I need to take charge of my life and myself. I'm the only agent there. I mean, we are the agents of our lives. The problem is that we don't actively manage our agency, most of us. Okay, so that's it. And and how do you do that? How do you start that journey? Uh, One thing that is extremely important that people understand is that the brain becomes good at what you push it to work on. So to start with, any person should erase any type of negativity from their lives. It's extremely important to understand the ramifications of allowing negative thoughts. First of all, the brain becomes super good in thinking negative thoughts because the brain strives for energy efficiency. That is perfection. Okay? So the more negative your thoughts you have, it's going to be an inflation of those. And negative thoughts is a pre-stage of fight and flight. What does it mean? It means that your brain works slower. You become a worse problem solver. It's also detrimental for your immune system. So there's a lot of value at stake by allowing negativity into your life. How do you eradicate that? Well, the long-term solution is to learn how to think logically about stuff, okay? Because then you can just see through stuff that this can simply be true. It can't be that bad. End of story. But if you are a person that are prone to negative thinking, you think that Kevin, that meeting, he was not good. He could have, validated me a little bit more, or whatever it is. Okay, make a calendar entry every day at a certain time, like 5 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever, and call it blame time or negativity time. And then you basically say, okay, I'm gonna relieve my brain from duty thinking negative thoughts, but then we're gonna really celebrate all the negativity in my life, and we're gonna think negative thoughts. What happened to almost all my clients is that when they sit there at 5 o'clock,
They can't come up with them.
and well, if they come up with them, then they say, well, maybe there's no real reason for this. And if there is a reason, they actually disassociate themselves from the reason, and then they understand also, Kevin could really have treated me, better in that meeting. I think I'm going to bring that up with him, because I think our collaboration is super important. So why don't we talk about our preferences and how we deal with each other? So it's all good. That's the first one, I would say. That's so important to do. And then, there's a gazillion things, other things. I would also say that manage the two most important things in life, which is your expectations and your effort. You can reduce life to that. What do I expect? What do I want to happen? And what is the effort I need to put in to do it? So every day, we talked about this before we started, that, always have an expectation of something you want to happen that day that really would make you feel good about yourself. And then think about the effort you can put after that. It's another version of the exciting outcome thing.
For sure. There's one other that I want you to talk about real briefly. That, like other things we've talked about, we could spend. I know that you and I can spend a long time on. We along with that negativity, we get pretty good at blaming other people and being a victim. And your suggestion for helping us get past being a victim is to be a detective. Can you just quickly share that metaphor or that idea with people?
Yeah, I mean, to have a detective mindset, to turn any type of failure or what you perceive as a negative experience into an interesting problem to understand. Why did this happen? So if we take that and we link that to what we talked about negativity, for instance, you and I collaborate, and we have collaborated for 2 years. And I select this because collaboration issues is such a source of dissatisfaction in organizations, the plus 100 I've seen. And then we have collaborated for 2 years. We had, let's say, 150 interactions, but 3 of those interactions we had a meltdown. Okay, I just felt that you didn't respect me, you didn't buy into what I said, and you were just like difficult. Okay, which led to a lot of negative things or whatever. Chances are, if anyone asks me, so how is your collaboration with Kevin? I would say, well, it's not that great. Okay, it's not.
Even though it's 3 out of 150.
Yeah.
Right.
So the detective mindset here, because what is at play here is it's a cognitive bias called the peak end rule, which is so detrimental for us. It's that we evaluate an event or relationship based on the emotional high and the last observation we have of it. So if the emotional high was negative, the negativity is much more painful for us than positive things. Chances are we will evaluate the whole thing in a very skewed way. So what you do as a detective then, okay, you draw a timeline. And then I plot all the interactions I had with Kevin, and then I mark the ones that has been bad. It's not too many, 3 out of 10. Okay, what happened there? Okay. And then I can start to make a calculation. What was the effect when it was negative? Yeah, but I could not let go of that for 4 hours of work time, and then we had to have another meeting, we had to this and that. So maybe it is some value at stake here. Maybe we can do something here with it, So that's the detective mindset. Same. I have people, that I will leave the company. I cannot work with that person. That boss is terrible. Okay, but it's an interesting problem. You can of course leave here, but that person is not the only one in the universe that has exactly the same profile. So if you want to shape your destiny, you need to figure out how to deal with that person. Otherwise, you're not. So start to observe that person. Start to observe what happens, and all these things. That's the detective mindset. You disassociate yourself from emotions and think rationally, logically about things.
And when you do that, you figure out that you're intertwined with all of that. And then you start to say, hey, this part of this belongs to me. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you really feel we should have? Is there a question I should have asked that I didn't?
Well, maybe you can then ask me, so Stefan, are you all beyond all this, that's in your book and all these things? No, I'm not. It's a constant struggle. I have a brain like anyone else I have, and the thing with the brain is that it's so easy to be a victim of the primitive parts of the brain. Okay, the fear center and the reward system that is a sucker for easy rewards, and I fight with that, all the time. But the way I think about it is that when I get all these negative thoughts or whatever it is, or I want to sort of run away from challenges or whatever it is, it's actually not me. It's the primitive part of my brain. So I took a driver's license first time in my life a few months back, and I was so scared of going out on the highway and changing lanes in fast speed or whatever. And my wife, she went to LA to visit her daughter. And then I rented a car. I'm going to practice during the weekend. And obviously, as soon as I rented the car, my brain is like, why do you do this to yourself? It's going to be super uncomfortable. Well, you work so hard, you have all these clients and all these things. Why don't you just wedge out, this weekend? You take a walk in Central Park and just like enjoy it. I mean, you deserve it. All these thoughts comes up. So obviously, the night before I'm supposed to practice, I didn't sleep well, because my brain is like, whatever. And in the morning, I'm super tired. I'm more tired than I've ever been, and I'm like, should I really take the car? But then I've developed a red alert in my brain. So when there's too many excuses, like, no, shape up here. And then my brain helps me formulate the question. Okay, you can avoid taking the car out now. And that means that, is that the life you want to have? So every time you rent a car with your wife, Regina, you're going to be anxious about driving. Do you want that life? No, obviously not. And then I made a thermos of coffee and I went out and I drove all the way down to Atlantic City, back and forth, practicing. And after 6 hours, I started to feel a little bit more confident, in it. So that's, how it is.
So what you're saying is, you're practicing just like you're encouraging us to practice.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
It's a lifelong, and I think it's the most exciting challenge because you actually evolve when you do it, but you still will end up in situations where your brain is trying to derail you. And it's important to say that I was not asked to be born with 150 cognitive biases that skews how I process information, or that I always, have a tendency to take the easy way out. I was not, when I was conceived, can you please build me like that? No, that's sort of a heritage we get from evolution. Okay, it's just that in today's world, it doesn't play out so well. And the best favor we can, do ourselves is to try to create a way of thinking and managing ourselves, so at least balance it out a little bit. We cannot take it away. It is impossible. That's it.
How do we balance it out a little bit? So speaking of balancing things out, we've been talking about how we can love our work, and I think like me, you would say that your work is fun, but what else do you do for fun? Maybe it's going to become driving. Maybe that's what it's going to become. But what do you do for fun?
What I do for fun? Well, I tell you one thing. It's a little bit of a redundant question to me, because when I wrote the book, I asked my son, I need to write something about myself. And he said to me, he's 23 at that time, well, you need to be honest. And I said, well, that's my plan. Well, then I think you should write that you're crazy. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because you're the only person in the universe that don't know how to be bored. And that is actually true. I just refuse boredom. It has no place in my life. So I love talking to my wife. We talk, for hours every day. We talk about work. We talk about stuff. But I also play 40 different instruments and a few things. And piano is my thing. So I play the piano at least an hour and a half every day, or at least an hour. So there's a lot. I just think that life is like, what is there not to love about it, except some of the more darker visions of the future that people like to talk about, which I don't really subscribe to. But so life is fantastic.
I'm with you. And one of the things that is fantastic for me is reading, including this book, Intrinsic Motivation, that Stefan wrote for us all, for our benefit. But my question is, what are you reading? Or what's something, Stefan, that you've read recently that we might find interesting?
Oh, well, what I read recently, both as a source of insight, but also a source of reminder that there was a person that knew everything about the human condition that unfortunately left us about a year and a half ago. That was my mentor, Csikszentmihalyi. And one of the books I tend to read over and over again is his book, Creativity. That is probably the most insightful book ever written on the human condition. It's magnificent. And the thing with him is that every word has such a deep meaning, and engaging with him was like a pleasure. The only thing that irritated me was every time I felt that I came up with something smart, that's something he already discovered 30 years ago. So trying to come with some kind of innovation with him, that's the only time in my life I felt that something was impossible, but it actually was.
Right. We'll put links to Creativity as well as Stefan's book in the show notes if you're watching the podcast. Anything you want to say to us about where we can learn more, where you want to point people, where they can get the book, anything at all?
Yeah, but please visit my website, learntoloveyourwork.com. It's going to be developed and more built and all these things, but learntoloveyourwork.com.
It has resources related to the book, as well as how you can get connected with Stefan and many other things. I hope that you will do that. And so now I have a question for all of you listening before we finish. It's a question I ask you every single episode. And the question is, now what? What are you going to do with this? Then there's no point here if you don't take some action. So what action is it? Hopefully, there are at least two of us here that hope you go out and buy a copy of this book. But beyond that, what are the things that you got here? Did you learn some things about your expectations? Did you get an idea about how to think about when you're in victim mode and blaming others? Did you get an idea about what you can do around how you use or think about your time? Did you get any ideas that might help you around dealing with negativity? Maybe you're going to block it out from 5 to 5:15 every night and do that negativity dump. But whatever it might be, there's a whole bunch of things that we talked about that you could take action on. The question is, which ones will you take? Because if you don't take action, what's the point? Stefan, thank you so much for joining us. It was a real pleasure to have you. I enjoyed the book a great deal. I'll be recommending it beyond just this podcast, and I hope that you enjoyed our time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me, Kevin. It's been a complete pleasure.
All right. So we're here every week. You maybe know that. If you didn't know that, hope you'll come back. If this is the first time you're listening to the podcast, make sure you come back or go back in the archives and take a look at some others in the past. Make sure wherever you are that you share and rate us, hopefully rate us highly. But most of all, I hope that you take action on what you learned and come back and join us in the future for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.